that means we are at the end of... Sorry, my dog is screaming. Hello, happy Pride Month. Shout out to the gays. As you can see, I am wearing a rainbow headband to celebrate, although this is mostly because it is wash day and my hair is pretty greasy. I'm in a very good mood today because I went into town to pick up a copy of Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, and to my surprise, I was given a complimentary tote bag. This is allyship right here. I don't know whose idea it was to make these tote bags and give them out, whether it was R.F. Kuang's marketing team or Waterstones, but like, they know their audience. Anyway, as it is Pride Month, I thought it would be fun to set myself another reading challenge. Last month I tried to read as many mythological and historical books as I could, and hopefully I will have edited and uploaded that video by the time I finish this one. But since it is Pride Month, I want to read as many LGBTQ+ books as I can. Books with authors who are in the community, books with queer and trans representation. Last month I read 11 books, which is a lot. So this month, taking that into consideration, I think I want to set myself a target of 8 books, maybe. Most of the books that I have are about 300 or so pages long, and most of them are YA, so I'm hoping they'll be quite easy and quick to read. So we'll see how it goes and if I manage to hit that target. I am also a couple of days behind already because it is June 3rd and I spent the first couple of days this month finishing Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, which I decided to start 2 days before May. But you know, space is gay, so we'll allow it. The first book I want to read this month is Gwen and Art Are Not in Love by Lex Croucher. I bought this one fairly recently and I've been seeing a lot of people loving it, so I'm very excited to read it. It is both sapphic and Achillean, so we are already ticking off 2 of the letters of the LGBTQIA+ alphabet community. I'm gonna get cracking on this and I will see you when I finished it.
So I lied. I am about halfway through Gwen and Art Are Not in Love, but I ended up finishing a different book before finishing that, so I'm gonna talk to you about that instead. So I read Something Fabulous by Alexis Hall, and this is a Regency era rom-com that follows our main guy, Valentine, who is a duke, and being a duke is about 50% of his personality. He brings it up so often. And the other 50% of his personality is basically that he is an asshole. He talks down to everyone. He doesn't treat people very well. And he believes that he is better than pretty much everyone he meets just by virtue of his rank. And he's pretty much just concerned with his duties as a duke, which is taking care of his estate and eventually marrying and having children. Whereas what he really wants in life is just to keep himself to himself. He is very much a Mr. Darcy type character, which is great for me because I love Mr. Darcy. So Valentine has been betrothed pretty much since birth to a young woman called Arabella Tarleton, except Arabella is a lesbian, so she's not too happy about Valentine coming along and proposing to her. So unhappy, in fact, that she decides to run off to America with her situationship, Peggy. And so Arabella's twin brother, Bonnie, convinces Valentine to chase after her and apologise and convince her not to leave England. Except in the process, Valentine ends up falling in love with Bonnie. This book was so much fun to read. It's very silly, it doesn't take itself too seriously, except for the moments where you just get an odd line or a scene that is just so tender and beautifully written and filled with romance and yearning. It's the perfect combination, I think, of the comedy and the romance, and that's really what a rom-com should be. I thought that the character development was really good. Valentine trying to balance what he thinks is more important, whether that is his position in society and his duties and how people perceive him, whereas on the other side, if he goes for what he wants, he runs the risk of giving all of that up. Yeah, it was a great read. I really enjoyed it. Hopefully the next time I see you I will have finished Gwen and Art and not some other book that I decided to randomly pick up. It really is summer because I am sweating balls right now. We are very much in the midst of a heat wave here in the south of England and I'm not having a good time. However, I did have a good time with Gwen and Art and Not in Love, which I finished yesterday. So this is a historical fiction, takes place in post-Arthurian Camelot, and it actually has quite a similar premise to Something Fabulous, with two people who are betrothed, except one of them is gay and one of them is a lesbian, and the guy ends up falling for the girl's brother. So yeah, coincidentally it is kind of the same story. However, I do think it tells the story in a slightly different way. While there is humour in this book, it's not quite as silly. It does take itself quite seriously, especially in the second half where you start getting more of the plot and the intrigue of the story, rather than just fleshing out the characters, which kind of happens in the first half of the book. I think the reason that it did take me a while to get into reading the book, and probably longer than I thought it would take me to finish it, was because the first half was quite character focused with not much plot, and then the second half was quite action filled and plot point filled and lots of twists happened, and that is what I really like in a book. So while it did take me a while to get into this book, the payoff of the final act was definitely worth the wait. I thought the characters were really, really well fleshed out, and the relationships between the characters were also very well written, and I just love books that involve close queer friendships and solidarity, as well as books that have good queer romance. So that is Gwen and Art Are Not in Love. And then yesterday I also started reading I Kissed Shara Wheeler by Casey McQuiston. I read Red, White and Royal Blue earlier this year, and this might be an unpopular opinion, but I really, really enjoyed it. So I am looking forward to reading more of this book. From what I can tell from the blurb on the back and from what I've read so far, it is looking like a sapphic version of Paper Towns, and this might be an unpopular opinion again, but back when I read Paper Towns, I did really enjoy it. So I will check back with you later with more of my thoughts. It is so hot. I am dying. I feel like I'm melting like the Wicked Witch of the West just because I'm sweating so much. However, one good thing about it being so hot is that I literally want to do nothing other than sit in front of the fan and read. So that is what I've been doing, and as a result I finished a book today and then I read a whole other book, so let's talk about that. So I finished I Kissed Shara Wheeler this morning, and this book surpassed my expectations by far. I thought it was just going to be a sapphic retelling of Paper Towns and that's it. However, that is literally half the story because there's so much more crammed into this book. It's got elements of Paper Towns, it's got elements of Gossip Girl, Pretty Little Liars, that kind of thing. It's got elements of The Prom, the musical. I think that this has the potential to be the coming of age story for the early 2020s. It deals with growing up in a very small, conservative southern town in a very Christian high school at a time when these characters, who are graduating seniors in this book, are just starting to get to grips with their identity. And this book has a kind of running theme of not judging people by their first impressions. So you get a load of characters who seem to live up to the stereotypical high school cliques. You've got jocks, you've got popular girls, you've got theatre kids. But as you look closer into these characters, they have layers. You have the laid-back jock who is very secretly into theatre. You've got the bad boy next door who has this perpetual crush on his neighbour, but he may actually be pining for someone else. You've got Shara Wheeler, who seems to be this perfect, popular, beautiful, smart principal's daughter, but she has so many layers. This book is essentially a character study of people like Shara who had so much pressure put on them by their parents, and so they don't really know who they are other than this image that their parents kind of molded them into. And I do feel like a lot of people will be able to relate to that. And if not Shara, then they'll definitely be able to relate to at least one of the other characters, because I certainly did. But yeah, I thought this book was fantastic. I really, really enjoyed it. I think it ranks higher than Red, White and Royal Blue does. And One Last Stop is on my TBR, and I will hopefully get to it eventually. I don't know if anything will be able to top this. Moving swiftly onwards, I then read the entirety of Nick and Charlie by Alice Oseman. This is a book that takes place after the Heartstopper graphic novels and after Solitaire, which was Alice Oseman's debut novel, and it focuses on Nick and Charlie as Nick is about to leave secondary school and enter university, and Charlie is kind of struggling with the idea of a long distance relationship. I will honestly read anything that Alice Oseman puts out. I have read almost everything that they have written, apart from Radio Silence, which is on my TBR. I don't know if I'll get to it this month, but we will see. And I love the Heartstopper universe, and I've loved revisiting the characters in it. However, I don't think this book is going to be my favourite thing in that universe by a long shot, and I will tell you why. I despise the miscommunication trope. I think it might be one of my least favourite tropes in existence. It just is so frustrating to me, because I'm just sitting there reading this and thinking, just talk, please, just talk to each other, you silly, silly boys. So the miscommunication trope is basically all this book is. And the stuff that isn't miscommunication is very, very cute, but I found myself very frustrated while I was reading this. However, it did take me only like 2 or 3 hours to read, so I wasn't frustrated for very long. And if you are looking for a cute little queer book that is very quick to read and will get you out of a reading slump, then give this one a go. So what are we reading next? We are reading Birthday next by Meredith Russo, and I picked this book up years ago and it's been sitting on my shelf, and I'm pretty sure that I picked it up solely because of the cover. I just found the cover so stunning. I love this kind of minimalist style, and also these sprayed edges are so pretty and immediately signal that this is a queer book, so double points for that. So I am hoping that what is inside the book will live up to the hype that I am getting from the cover. Hello, it is still really hot outside. There are children screaming in next door's garden. I'm pretty sure I'm wearing the same top as I did in the last part of the video, but let's just get on with it. I finished Birthday. This is a dual point of view book told over 6 different birthdays from age 13 to age 18, and it's from the point of view of these 2 best friends who were born on the same day in the same place, and so they've basically known each other their entire lives, and they are growing up together and getting to grips with their identities. So on the one hand you have Eric, who has grown up under immense pressure from his father, which eventually turns into full-on abuse, and he's been pressured into pursuing a football career, but what he really wants to do is to pursue a music career. And then you have Morgan, who is a closeted trans girl, and she spends most of the book coming to terms with her identity and accepting herself and getting up the courage to come out to the people that she loves and getting to live her life as her authentic self. I thought this was a solid book. I liked the romance. It was very cute. It was kind of slow burn. I thought that the character arcs were well written. You could see a fair amount of development and growth in the 2 main characters throughout the 6 years. I did feel a little bit like the pacing sped up a bit too quickly in the last couple of sections, and things were kind of wrapped up quite neatly, especially because most of this book deals with some pretty complex and dark and difficult issues that I feel like can't be realistically resolved as quickly as they are within the book. So overall, I did enjoy it. It was a solid, I think, 3.75 star read. I am currently about 30% of the way through Something Spectacular, which is the sequel to Something Fabulous, which was the Regency era romance that I read earlier this month. So far, I'm really enjoying it. We get to see a lot of familiar faces again, which I love, and I will give a full review once I've finished it. In terms of physical books, my next book that I want to read is This Is How You Lose the Time War, which I'm very excited for because there is so much hype surrounding this book. However, I think I'm probably going to wait a couple of days to actually start it because I feel like this is the kind of book that you want to read within like 1 or 2 sittings and really kind of take the time to sit with it and process it. So I'm gonna give it a go on the next day that I have free and at home, and I will tell you what I think. Right, what can I say about This Is How You Lose the Time War? This is a sapphic romance about rival agents on opposing sides of a multiversal war who communicate through space and time and different timelines through letters. And that is all I'm really going to tell you because I think this book is best gone into completely blank and not knowing what you're getting into. This book has been hyped up so much on social media that I really thought that I was going to be disappointed. However, it absolutely lived up to the hype and I loved it. The prose is so beautifully written, and I was right in thinking that it's the kind of book that you really have to sit down and properly focus on. And I am so glad that I did because this book is just full of some of the most beautiful, loving prose that I have read in a very long time. I think you can tell quite easily when a book has been written with love, and this book has had so much love poured into it. I don't particularly want to give as thorough a review of this book as I do with most other books that I read, because again, I think that people should go into this book completely blind and not know what is going to hit them. All I will say is just read it. It lives up to the hype and it will only take you a couple of days probably. So that is This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Matar and Max Gladstone. The next book I'm going to be reading is The First to Die at the End by Adam Silvera. This is the prequel to They Both Die at the End. And that was one of the only books I read in my first year of university. I remember it so clearly. It was after exams, so I had a load of free time and I got through it in like 2 days and it broke me. So I am very much hoping that this book has a similar effect. Hello, I have just got back from a dance class. I'm pretty sweaty. I look like an egg with my hair up, but I don't care. I'm going to talk about some books. So I finished The First to Die at the End. It took me a while, A, because it's a long, chunky book, and B, because I had to put this book aside for a couple of days because it was getting a little bit dark, and I ended up finishing a couple of other books while also on the go with this one. But I'm going to talk about this one first. This is the prequel to They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera, the same author, and this takes place on the very first day that Deathcast is released. And Deathcast is this company, this technology that can predict on the day that you are going to die that you are going to die. And the people who have signed up for Deathcast get a phone call from them on the day they're going to die, telling them that they are going to die within the next 24 hours. The main focus of this book is on Orion and Valentino, who end up meeting just before Deathcast is announced, and one of them ends up getting the very first phone call from the company. You have Orion, who suffers from a chronic heart condition and has pretty much accepted that he is going to die fairly early on in his life. And then you have Valentino, who is a model who has just moved into New York and is pretty much starting his career. The plot is pretty predictable. It does exactly what it says on the tin. It's about the first to die at the end. I was kind of worried going into this book that this kind of concept of knowing exactly what's going to happen wasn't really going to land the same with this book as it did in They Both Die at the End. But without spoiling, there is something that happens in the plot that adds a really, really good level of tension to the book. So you're not actually quite sure if everything is going to end up exactly the way that is predicted. One of the main things that I loved about They Both Die at the End is how Adam Silvera showed how people are connected within New York. There are little snippets of points of view littered throughout the book from the perspectives of lots of different, seemingly random people who all end up being connected. And the same is done here. You get lots of tiny kind of single chapter points of view scattered throughout Orion and Valentino's story, with people who are connected to them and each other in one way or another. And they are seemingly random at first, but as you spot the different connections, the plot starts to come together and it all builds to this really, really exciting and tense climax. And what's really lovely about this book is that because it's a prequel, you get to see a little bit of certain familiar faces from They Both Die at the End, years before that book takes place. So we get to see a little bit of baby Rufus and Matteo as well as their families. So going back to the relationship between the main characters of Ryan and Valentino, there is a romance there. One of the main kind of criticisms that I tend to see about They Both Die at the End is that it does feel pretty insta-lovey, and the same kind of goes for this book. I think that is an issue that you are going to automatically come across whenever you read a book, a romance that is set over the course of a single day. But I think this is where the length and the slower pace of this book really comes to its advantage. I don't tend to particularly enjoy longer or slower paced books. However, in this case, I feel like the slower pace of the book stretches out the romance so it doesn't feel quite as insta-lovey, and it really takes the time to build and expand on the feelings and the emotions and the connection between the two. Another criticism I tend to see of They Both Die at the End is that the world building could have been fleshed out a little bit more. And in this book, Adam Silvera really takes the opportunity to explore this world of Deathcast. You get to see the very beginnings of how the USA is affected by this life-changing technology and how it is starting to adapt to it. You also get chapters from the points of view of people within the Deathcast company itself, from the people who work at the call centre and call the people who are going to die that day, as well as the point of view of the founder of the company itself. So it's a very interesting exploration of this world without giving away too much about its secrets. So that was The First to Die at the End by Adam Silvera. This week I also read You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. This book follows Liz, who is a high school senior who decides to compete for prom queen at her school in order to gain a much needed scholarship to college so that she can escape her conservative small town. And she ends up falling for another girl who is also competing for prom queen alongside her. I think that Liz is a really great protagonist with a very strong narrative voice. And her struggle as a black queer girl to be seen and accepted as equal to her white and or straight peers is very well articulated, especially when she ends up clashing with her more privileged friends who do mean well, but they don't fully understand just how hard she has to work. Liz also suffers from severe anxiety, and in my opinion, as someone who also suffers from anxiety, I think that she provides pretty good representation of that. However, outside of Liz, I kind of felt like the more supporting characters felt quite one-dimensional and flat. You've got very stereotypical characters like the popular mean girl who is the villain of the story. You've got the hippie stoner who seems to just talk about astrology and spirituality. You've got the disapproving conservative principal who randomly does a complete 180 at the end of the book. And to me, that felt quite out of character. The story itself felt pretty cheesy. It kind of had the same vibes as those fake everyone on the bus clapped stories that you used to see all over Tumblr. However, I am not the target demographic for this story. This is a book that is intended for young adults, and so it's going to feel a little bit less mature for my tastes. I can guarantee you that had this book been released in 2015 or 2016, and had I read it when I was a teenager, I would have eaten this shit up. So overall, this is a cute, feel-good sapphic story. And then the third book that I finished this week was Something Spectacular by Alexis Hall, which is the sequel to Something Fabulous. Again, this is set in Regency-era England, and this time it follows Peggy Delancey, who is the best friend / ex-lover of Arabella Tarleton. And Arabella takes Peggy to London in order to have Peggy help her seduce a beautiful, talented castrato named Orfeo. However, Peggy and Orfeo end up falling for each other instead. While Something Fabulous feels like a more idyllic fairy tale-esque romance set as it is in the Surrey and Kent countryside, Something Spectacular feels a lot more grounded in that it's set in London where real life and other people's opinions tend to get in the way of people's fantasies. And as a result, the characters have to deal with issues of who they are and whom they love, where the solutions, if there are solutions, are a lot more complex. For example, the two non binary main characters present themselves differently and therefore they face different problems. Peggy usually presents herself more femininely, especially in high society, and while that means that she is accepted in society because of this, she ends up feeling gender dysphoria pretty much the whole time. However, Orfeo presents themselves as clearly androgynous, which is how they want to present themselves. But even though they are celebrated and praised as an opera singer because of their talent, that doesn't mean that they are respected as a person, and quite often they are disrespected and talked down to because of their gender presentation. As well as those two, a lot of the supporting characters also go through their own developed character arcs. One that I particularly love is Arabella's. She is pretty insufferable in the first book, but in this book, probably because it's told from the point of view of her best friend, she is seen in a much more sympathetic light. She's beginning to realise that she is aromantic and she's taking it pretty hard. Having grown up reading a lot of love stories with her brother Bonnie, and especially since Bonnie has already had his love story in Something Fabulous, she has always believed herself to be destined to marry for love. And now that she's starting to realise that romantic love might never be on the cards for her, she now needs to work out what her purpose in life actually is. Good aromantic representation is pretty rare, even in queer books, so I would really love to see more of Arabella's journey because she has a lot of potential to be some really, really good aromantic rep. So overall, this is a great sequel with a great love story. There's still a lot of silliness. At one point, Peggy accidentally starts an orgy, which is a unexpectedly funny scene to read. But I really did love the more mature and complex direction that Alexis Hall took with this book. So that was Something Spectacular. There aren't that many days left of June. I am very close to finishing another book. I will probably finish it today, so I'll get back to you on that. And then I will probably read one more book, so not that many updates left now. Hello, I'm back. I look slightly less like an egg now, but it's still the same day, and I have just finished reading The Charm Offensive by Alison Cochrane. In The Charm Offensive, we meet Charlie, who is a tech millionaire and an eligible bachelor, and he becomes the star of a reality dating show that's essentially a fairy tale themed The Bachelor, and he goes on it in order to repair his reputation so that he can work in the tech industry once again. But instead of falling for any of the female contestants on the show, he ends up developing feelings for his handler, Dev. Firstly, there is so much representation in this book for all flavours of the alphabet mafia. We've got gays, we've got lesbians, we've got bis, pansexuals, asexuals, demisexuals, all kinds. And while there are lots of characters who are already out and proud at the start of the book, there are a few characters who either discover their sexuality throughout the course of the book or they open up about their past self-discovery. And their stories are told with such compassion, and it made me really happy to read. And it's also representation that doesn't feel forced, it feels really natural. There is also a lot of really, really good mental health representation in this book. Charlie suffers from OCD and a panic disorder, and Dev suffers from depression. This is also treated with a lot of compassion, and it felt like real, unstigmatized representations of mental illness. I also really appreciated the fact that this book shows that getting into a relationship isn't automatically going to fix all your problems. As much as we like to joke, it isn't going to water your crops, clear your skin, cure your depression. And Charlie and Dev have to put in a lot of work themselves so that their relationship can be a healthy one. And their relationship is really sweet. It's very opposites attract, which isn't normally my favourite trope, but it works so well here.
On top of all that, you have the reality TV plot, and Alison Cochrane has done a really, really good job of giving insight into how fake reality TV really is. A person's image can be manipulated from before they even start filming, when they're planning out activities and outfits, right up to after the cameras are finished rolling and you're editing the footage together. And I thought that was a really interesting part of the book, especially uncovering all of the misogyny surrounding the whole concept of the show, even though the creator of the show herself was a woman. So that was The Charm Offensive by Alison Cochrane. So I think I am on to my last book for Pride Month, and I'm going to read Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. And I'm really excited to read it. I've read everything else by Alice Oseman, so I'm hoping that I'm going to enjoy Radio Silence just as much as I enjoyed everything else. So I finished reading Radio Silence by Alice Oseman, and I put off this book. I decided not to read it until well after I was done with university, because I was suffering from pretty bad academic burnout for like the second half of my master's, and I just knew that if I read this I would just want to fully drop out. So I think I was right too, because this book hit. Alice Oseman just has a way of writing teen characters that are just so realistic. They are flawed, they make big mistakes, they screw up, they are cringe. I see a lot of people complaining that they're cringe, but like, have you interacted with a teenager? They are cringe. Like, especially the ones who didn't like fit into the partying crowd and preferred to just like stay at home and scroll on Tumblr. Alice Oseman writes books for the weird kids, the introverts. The main character of Radio Silence is Frances, who is in sixth form and preparing to get into Cambridge University, and she's had a bit of a reputation for being the responsible, smart kid. She is head girl, and she has worked so hard just to get into Cambridge and pursue a degree at Cambridge University. But in this book, she is forced to come to terms with whether that's really what she wants now. Have her priorities changed? Has she changed as a person? Is she wanting to go to Cambridge for the right reasons? And yeah, Frances was very relatable to me as a character. The other part of the plot of this book deals with Frances becoming involved with a podcast show, a bit like Welcome to Night Vale, called Universe City. And she's been a fan of it for a couple of years, and she becomes involved with it, becomes friends with the creator, and it deals a lot with fandom culture and how fans can be harmful towards the creators of the things that they love, even by accident. So I think anyone who has been on Tumblr or involved with fandom culture for any period of time will be able to connect with some of the stuff inside this book. Another thing that I loved about Radio Silence is that it is set in the same universe as all of Alice Oseman's books. It's set a couple of years after Solitaire, and you get to see a few kind of recurring characters from the universe. You get to see a bit of Nick and Charlie. Obviously Aled, who is a big character in this book, is a character in the Heartstopper graphic novels. You get to see a glimpse of Michael, I think his name is, from Solitaire. And I believe you get to see Tori at the very end of the book, which is great because Tori is one of my favourite characters. I love Easter eggs. I think they can be a really clever way to tie things up into a universe without being too obvious, but at the same time it's also not necessary for you to have read the other books in the universe for you to enjoy Radio Silence, because they are little cameo appearances and they just enhance the reading experience if you have read them, but if you haven't read them it doesn't affect the plot or anything. But yeah, that is Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. But today is June 30th, so that does mean that we are at the end of my reading challenge this month. I read 11 queer books this month, which I think is the same as the amount of books I read last month, so yay for me. We love a bit of consistency in this house. My favourite book this month was This Is How You Lose a Time War. I just thought the writing in this was so fluid and beautiful and romantic. I love an enemies to lovers. I love a bit of yearning. It's such a tender romance. yeah, definitely read it. Big Listiculous was correct on this one. You should absolutely check it out. And my least favourite this month was probably Nick and Charlie. It was cute, but I think compared to how much I've enjoyed the rest of Alice Oseman's books, I feel like this was a little bit of a disappointment. It wasn't really for me, but it could be for other people. So if you are a fan of the Heartstopper universe, give it a read. Thank you so much for watching. If you got to the end of this, thank you for the dedication. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And yeah, subscribe if you want. I have more ideas for videos hopefully coming fairly soon. If you have any recommendations for LGBTQ plus books, please leave them down in the comments. Yeah, I want to hear about your favourite books, and I am always up for some queer representation, so do that. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next video.